Good morning, everyone. Still getting coffee and stuff. That's good. Need coffee. You remember last year at the College of the Atlantic Summer Institute 2021, we focused on food, right? So today I think we have a really great nexus of last year and this year. And at last year's conference, at least 3 or 4 people raised their hands and asked questions about the curiously named American Aquaculture proposal. That's a Norwegian company that had 2 60-acre proposed leases out in Frenchman Bay to produce 66 million pounds of finfish a year. And many of us, myself included, were actually quite excited when the Department of Marine Resources rejected that proposal, and that was in April of this year. And they rejected it based on some concerns they had about the genetics of the egg source material. On May 19th, American Aquaculture sued the DMR, and then on Tuesday of this week, so the 26th, American Aquaculture dropped that lawsuit. Wait. Yes, but in dropping that, they're still very much interested in bringing a new proposal to Frenchman Bay. And I think many of us, not all of us, but many of us in the audience know that aquaculture has got to be in the mix for Maine's future. And it's really a matter at which scale, where, with what technologies, and what the appropriate species are. It's got to be part of the mix. It's got to be part of the mix. And I'm so excited to have 4 experts and leaseholders and aquaculturists here who can walk us through some of these questions that we'll explore today. Brianna Warner, Joe Fogg, Abby Barrows, and Fiona De Konig. And so I'm super excited to have the 4 of them here to discuss aquaculture with a great friend of the college, Natalie Springuel. And Natalie and I almost graduated the same year. Natalie's class of 1991. She's my elder. And she's at the University of Maine Sea Grant Extension, where she's an advocate, an educator, a great storyteller of the oceans, here in the Gulf of Maine and more broadly. And she may have spent more time in a kayak, in the seat of a kayak in Maine waters than just about anyone else on the planet. So she knows the waters of our state very, very intimately. And I can think of no better person to help guide this conversation. So without further ado, welcome.
Thank you. Is this working? Thank you, Darren. That was a fun introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this final morning of an incredible week. This week, we've been all over the world's oceans. It's been a fantastic, inspiring whirlwind trip to every corner of this watery earth. This morning, we're staying closer to home. We're taking a deep dive back into our own waters, the coast of Maine, where people have relied on the sea to drive our economy and shape our culture for hundreds of years. Did you know, for example, that during the Civil War era, our very own Frenchman Bay, the waters in this banner, the waters right out there, they were speckled with fishing schooners of all sizes, most of them locally built and owned, sending more cod to markets than any other coastal region? It's kind of an amazing history, right? But fast forward to the present. There's not been a single cod commercially harvested from Frenchman Bay in, I don't know, over 20 years or so. The ocean is changing. How we make our living from the sea is changing. Fishermen have always been the masters of adaptation, switching from one species to the next based on seasons, regulations, and markets. Adaptation is key to success in an ocean-based way of life. With climate change, that's true today more than ever. So as Darren said, I work for the University of Maine Sea Grant program, and I've been working for Sea Grant for more than 20 years. Sea Grant, if you're not familiar with it, is a partnership between NOAA, that's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and in the state of Maine, the University of Maine is our state partner. And Sea Grant fosters marine research, outreach, and education that supports coastal communities and the sustainable use of our ocean and coastal resources. I'm super lucky because my extension office is based right here at COA and has been for 2 decades. And every day, the COA human ecology ethos guides my approach to marine and coastal issues. So in my work, I've had the incredible honor of facilitating many, many conversations on everything from aquaculture to wind energy, from community development to fisheries research priorities. Public dialogue on hard things is absolutely critical. And examples of solutions and ways that work are what inspire us to move forward. So that's what today's panel is all about. Last night, I hope many of you were able to capture the electrifying talk, at least it was for me, with Bob Ballard and Allison Fundis. And during the Q&A, you may have remembered that someone asked Bob Ballard how he felt about the future of fisheries in our oceans. And Bob replied, without missing a beat, we gotta go to farming. Farming the sea. Aquaculture, or farming the sea, has played a role on the coast of Maine for 50 years or so. But the last decade or so has seen shellfish and seaweed farming, in particular, emerge as integral parts of the diverse ways that people make a living from the sea. I'm so grateful, actually, that aquaculture is a topic at this year's Institute. Aquaculture is incredibly diverse and still an emerging field, with everything from tiny one-person operations farming oysters, kind of like you or I might grow vegetables in the back 40, all the way to multinational corporations growing salmon for international markets. I just said the salmon word. So I won't go into giving you the synopsis on American aquafarms because I think all of you have been following it, and Darren just gave us a quick synopsis. So I'll skip that, but I did want to acknowledge that for many people, quite possibly many of you, the American Aquafarm proposal has raised the stakes on the aquaculture conversation. It has challenged your sense of place and fired your love of the waters around Mount Desert Island. When Sean and Darren asked me to moderate this panel, they said they wanted to not shy away from the tough subjects. They wanted to provide a forum to talk about the hard things. And yeah, American aquafarms for many people is viewed as a hard thing. But we're not going to get stuck there today. We're not going to talk about American aquafarms. Instead, let's hear from our panelists about the possibilities. Let's talk about opportunity and restoration, innovation, and the commitment of each of our panelists to integrate aquaculture into our working waterfronts in ways that work for our communities while also providing food, jobs, and economic development. I'm incredibly honored to introduce these 4 women. Each one draws deeply from their personal connections to the ocean. I share that with each one of them. They are innovative, and they are creating ways to work the sea today and into the future. They're producing food, and they're sustaining Maine's way of life. I'm in awe of each one of them, to be quite frank. And I'm super excited to hear what they have to say today. So let me introduce them. All the way on the end, we have Brianna Warner. Bree has dedicated her life to doing well by doing good. A world traveler, she's passionate about Maine. She's the CEO of Atlantic Sea Farms, where she and her team have forged a new path for seaweed aquaculture in the US by working directly with fishermen. It's kind of cool and innovative to grow kelp as a climate change adaptation strategy and building national demand for that kelp. If you don't know, kelp is a seaweed. Next in line is Fiona De Konig. Hi, Fiona. Fiona grew up on the east coast of England, sailing and falling in love with the ocean. You're sensing a theme here about people's connection to the ocean. She and her husband Theo, a 5th-generation Dutch mussel farmer, followed a dream to bring Dutch-style mariculture, another word for aquaculture, to the US more than 15, 16, 18 years ago, I've lost track, and have since integrated their business and their growing family into Maine's working waterfront by becoming active members of the MDI community. Next up, we have Joanna. Hi, Joanna. Joanna hails from Mount Desert Island, and she's also Imagine that, been drawn to the ocean. She spent most of her life working on the water as a lobsterman, as a sailor, as a chef on private yachts, and now as co-owner with her husband Jesse of Bar Harbor Oysters. She's also a graduate of College of the Atlantic, class of '07, and is dedicated to making her livelihood as an oyster farmer right here where she grew up. And finally, last but not least, is Abby Barrows, also one of our COA alums, I think 2018 master's program. Born and raised in Stonington, not very far from here, where she also developed a passion for the ocean. Abby is a marine research scientist focused on aquatic plastic pollution, which is kind of a cool additional angle to our conversation today. And she's the owner and operator of Long Cove Sea Farm, an oyster aquaculture business in Deer Isle. Welcome to all four of you.
Thank you.
So what's especially cool about our panelists today is that they are fairly well representative of the incredible diversity of Maine's growing shellfish and seaweed aquaculture sector. And so we wanted to make sure that each of them gets a chance to share their story and reflect on some of the key themes that are some of the hot topics related to aquaculture today, especially here in Maine. So the way this is gonna work is I'm gonna join them at my chair, and I'm gonna pose some questions to them. And we met a few weeks ago to kind of talk about what are the most important things that we wanna make sure we cover. I wanna make sure you guys hear about their businesses and hear a little bit about their perspective and their approach to aquaculture and their commitment to the coast of Maine. And then we'll work our way through a couple questions and give them some time to reflect on some topics. And then we'll save some time at the end to give you guys a chance to share some reflection or some questions. So, I'm going to ask you my first question from here, and we didn't decide who starts answering, so I'll let you guys jump in. My first question is, so you all might recall or see in the booklet that the title of today's panel is Restorative Aquaculture. So as you tell us about your respective business philosophy and model and what your businesses are doing, tell us how it fits into restorative aquaculture and how you define that term, restorative aquaculture.
Just for the record, these jerks made me swim at 7:30 this morning. Just for the record, we swam with her. I'm a southern Maine girl. That doesn't fit me up here. As Natalie said, I'm the CEO of Atlantic Sea Farms. Our model is very different than anything that has existed in Maine before, but also very different than anything that's existed in aquaculture in the Western Hemisphere before. We're really proud of what we've built in the last 3 years. Our kelp from our partner farmers last year constituted 85% of all the seaweed. 85% of all the seaweed grown in the United States, being led by Maine lobstermen, and all of the seaweed, and 95% of the seaweed being grown in Maine, led by Maine lobstermen. And restorative to me can mean so many things. Restorative to the ocean, yes. Restorative to people's guts, because seaweed is so good for you. It's restorative to your health. But to me, what drives me is the restoration of hope that aquaculture can provide, not fear, which is what is often brought to the table when we talk about aquaculture. And fear is one of the most insidious, problematic positions to take on anything. It will eat you alive. But one thing that will always make you thrive is hope. And that's what aquaculture in Maine means to me, and what I'd like us all to position our brain on instead of fear. And what I see in these 27 fishermen that I work with is hope for a future that is restorative, where their families can continue to work on the water, where their sons and daughters who want to be just like their fathers and mothers and work on the water don't have to be fearful of if they're going to bring anything up in their traps. And there's this narrative right now that somehow fishermen are raking it in. People are making so much money. It's absolutely not true. And I want to go into why I'm doing kelp for a second, just by highlighting lobster. The 10 best years in the lobster industry have been in the last 17 years. The reason for that is twofold. One, because it's the most conservation-minded industry, fishing industry in the United States. It's owner-operated, it's conservation-minded, there's V-notch cuts in their tails to restore the brooding stock, there's trap limits. There's a number of things that has made it happen. The other side is much darker. The Gulf of Maine is warming faster than 98% of oceans in the world. And that is creating a situation where the lobster population is thriving at a greater rate because of the water temperatures than it did 25 years ago. So while we can be very proud of the fact that our lobster industry is still very much intact, for a large part on the backs of the conservation measures of those who fish it, we also are very threatened in a future where that industry is going to become increasingly volatile as that water warms more and more. Bait prices are astronomical. Fuel prices, you think it takes a while to get your car up here? Imagine putting one of those boats out there. The boats are having to get bigger and bigger. I hear people all the time, they have a ton of money, they're getting bigger boats. You know why they're getting bigger boats? Because they have to go out further. And they're over-leveraged. It's hard to continue to make your money on the water when you're going from season to season with one monoculture, with no other options. There's nothing else out there. So you have to bet it big, and you have to get a big boat, and you got to get a big truck, and you got to get a big crew, because otherwise you're definitely not making any money. And so what we're looking at is an uncertain future, and I deeply love our coast, and that coast is deeply threatened by this warming water. But instead of embracing fear, we're talking about hope. So in the winter, people are farming kelp on their off season as a way to diversify their income and adapt to climate change, while also mitigating some of its effects by reducing ocean acidification locally where they farm. So I am just really proud of what we're building. That's what I think restorative is, but I think that's what aquaculture is in general, and all for very different reasons for all of us. So I'll hand it over to Fiona.
I think that sorry, I thought you were going to wallop me for something. So we farm here in the bay mostly. We are a multi-generational company, so we're a little bit different from Brie. My husband is a 5th-generation mussel farmer, and we've come from the Netherlands. His family have been farming mussels since the time of Napoleon. So basically on a very simple kind of project, it's very, very low tech. But if that's a proof of sustainability of the technique, I don't know what else can beat that. Anybody? No? Anybody else been farming since Napoleon? Anyone? No? Okay, so obviously there have been improvements, but it's mainly in the monitoring, and the science is catching up with it. But this is a very direct form of farming. So we farm mussels. They are on the lower end of the price bracket, I think unfortunately so from my own personal perspective, but it does mean that we have to do it in a volume that makes sense in order to be able to maintain our boat and also to maintain the rate of pay for our people. So we have a large amount of acres, as has been mentioned once or twice locally, but we grow on a two-dimensional seabed. So we're what we call bottom culture farms. So there are advantages and disadvantages of different culture techniques, but these are, you can't see them, they're under the water. So it has advantages for viewscape, it has disadvantages for number of acres you need. So there are all these nuances. So we have our sons are both now working full time in the company. My son Alex is here. He lives on the island. As well, and my 2 little granddaughters, they are also supported by this. We employ 15 people year-round. We pay well. We pay them well. Subtle difference. Not the boys, but no, he doesn't get paid that well either, but our crew we pay well. We love working here on the island. We love it in Maine. We consider it a complete honour and privilege to be able to be living here. The story of how we came here is that my husband is an entrepreneur, and he basically wanted to add on something to the company. He felt that it was unfair just to coast along on the hard work by our forefathers, as it were, in the company. So he decided that he was going to do something else, and we were exploring, and Maine was just the place. In fact, he came here and didn't come home, is the honest answer. He came into Bar Harbor, and he was like, I got a telephone call saying, well, this is it. This is where we're going to be. So you might as well pack up everything, including the children, and sort out the schools. And anyway, I digress a little bit. But anyhow, we did that, and he stayed here, and we started with 3 of us. And our first customer is now our largest customer. And so we worked from 3 people up to 15 people, and we now have our own processing plant down by the airport. And it's hard work. It's a way of life. We love it. I am so proud of what it's become. Shellfish farming is the most benign form of mariculture that there can be. It's cleaning the water. I have a problem with the word restorative. I mean, it sounds so cute. I like to be restored. Everybody wants to be restored, and particularly after a pandemic, it does feel so lovely to be restored, doesn't it? But it's not. It's more of a word that can mean different things to different people, and certainly with a topic like aquaculture, that can also mean different things to different people. I love that word, but there are lots of people who don't, and it's really the same thing, whichever end of that word you're looking at it. So I tend to want to look at it as a more holistic, middle of the road kind of thing. So I think hopeful, it has to be part of the picture, but we have to look at it more scientifically, more grown up than just words that are designed to evoke an emotional response. So dig deep is what I would say. There's a lot to say from positive things. That's not to say that people aren't right to be cautious. I think we are. I am. I'm very cautious about what we do, and I think most of our aquaculture sector are. We were not thrilled by the proposal that was put in by American Aquafarms. We really weren't. I don't know any grower that was happy about that. But there's a lot of misinformation out there, and Darren, you're going to have to forgive me for this, if Darren is still here. Darren, I'm sorry, but a lot of what you had said in your introduction was just not right. The DMR didn't reject it for any of the criteria. They didn't even make it to having a complete proposal because they were so incompetent they couldn't even get their application in. So there was a terrible proposal on all levels, and they wouldn't have made it through the application in terms of the criteria. You're quite correct with that, but they didn't even get it in. So that was a nightmare situation that has caused people who are genuinely careful with the environment and what they do a lot of trouble. I've had to change all of my website, all of my email addresses to our brand name because we were getting confused. And it has been very difficult. But that isn't to say that the hope, as Bree was talking about, for people who live here, invest here, and get engaged with the community here aren't going to bring a lot of things that are going to be beneficial to this area. And I think that is a much more positive way to look at it. And I am very proud of what we do. I'm also very proud of my fellow farmers. They are a great bunch of people. I have never worked in a sector that is so collaborative and positive and helpful for one another. So if I can be proud of anyone, it's of all of these women too.
Thanks, Fiona. They're kicking me because I dragged them on this panel as well. And unlike me, I actually have no idea what I'm going to say, but I talk about aquaculture a lot. I've been farming here. I grew up on the island, so did my husband. We're both locals. We have both been drawn to working on the water and have done so in different capacities for most of our lives. In 2014, I was working on private yachts, sailing around the Caribbean, and my husband was fishing in the Bering Sea. I had a much better deal. But we decided that we both wanted to come home at some point and maybe spend some time together and maybe raise a family and do something that we could actually get behind, something that we could care about, and something that would be meaningful. My husband has a long fishing background. It's been in his family. I worked on fishing vessels for several years as well. But we were wary of the future of wild fisheries, particularly lobster fishing, and it's a closed fishery. It's not easy to get a license. And we wanted to do something that would allow us to maintain our lifestyle of working on the water and being on the water, and to do something for ourselves. We knew nothing about aquaculture. We thought about growing finfish, didn't really get into that, thought about oysters, and was like, all right, we literally just started looking at YouTube, and we're like, all right, how would we do this? But we knew about the oceans, we knew about boats, we knew how to tie some knots, and we cared. We cared deeply, and we wanted to be here. So where there weren't jobs for us, we created them, and we started with some very small lease sites, and literally like a box of seed and a couple of cages, and just dove in, literally, metaphorically, to see if we could grow oysters here. And we've been growing a little bit more and producing a little bit more year after year after year, and it's working. And that's been restorative to us as individuals and as a couple and as a family. It's allowed us to stay here for the most part. My husband still ships out about half of the year. He's still kind of supporting my oyster habit, but we're hopefully that will change. We now have hundreds of cages. We have a standard lease, and this year we project selling up to a couple 100,000 oysters, and none of them are crossing the Trenton Bridge. We cannot get our product beyond MDI. I also buy oysters from 2 other small farms to deliver them, and we're not making a dent in what this island can consume. Yeah, I'm also buying some from hers. Yeah, I have a lot of help from Fiona. Yes, she's growing oysters for me. It's amazing the amount of food this island can go through with the number of people we have in the summer, but we also harvest and deliver year-round. The importance of this food system became extremely clear to me during the pandemic when shelves were bare and I had acres of food. And people came out to buy them and to eat them, and that felt really good. We're farming a species that's native to Maine. We feed them nothing. They just are, feeding on the nutrients and everything that's already naturally in our very rich waters. And we optimize their growth as much as we possibly can in a wild environment. And we're producing food, and it's healthy for us. So that restorative bit, it's good for our bodies, it's good for our communities, and it's been good for us as individuals. We care deeply about the waters that we have the privilege to farm. We get in them all of the time. I feel very connected to the water. I think that all of us have can be drawn to it. I mean, we're made out of salt water. I swim year-round in the ocean, and I do that really not to reconnect with nature, but to remember on a cellular level that I'm a part of it. Like this is us. We belong here, and we can do this, and there shouldn't be a separation between us and our waters, and we can eat from them and live in them and on them and work them, and I think that's restorative to us as humans.
Thank you, Joanna. All right, last but hopefully not least, hard act to follow here, these lovely women. And excuse me, I have a chest cold, and my voice might fail me a little bit. So my background, before I got into oyster farming, and currently, is looking at microplastic pollution in our oceans. And so plastic pollution and our use of plastic has been on the forefront of my mind for most of my adult life. And so when I first heard about aquaculture, first heard about oyster farming, I was very intrigued. And like many fisheries, they are 100% reliant on plastic. And when I bought Long Cove Sea Farm in 2015, I was thrilled, but then also so depressed that all the gear I was buying was plastic. Especially at that point, I was sort of at the peak of my global research. And so restorative aquaculture is something I've thought a lot about from a lot of different angles. And first and foremost, we know that oysters are provide amazing ecosystem services. For those of you who listened to the Billion Oyster Project presentation, they are changing the landscape and restoring the bays in incredible and very rapid ways. So we know that component, and I think that's very restorative and really important to remember that oysters are filter feeders, and they're not only not doing harm, but they're actively doing good for the local waters. But for me, I wanted to, as a business owner, and that was a new hat for me to wear, I really wanted to expand that lens further. How can we be restorative in all components of our business? What kind of paint are we putting on our boat? How are we powering our boat? How are we powering our tumblers and our graters? Can we use solar power to do that? How are we keeping our oysters cold? What materials are we using to grow those oysters? What packages are we putting our oysters in? So for me, the restorative piece was much more than just growing oysters and improving the local waters. It was a bigger piece that I'm still working on, but for me, it's really thinking about every step of being a business owner and how to be a steward across the board. So for years, I was using the plastic gear that I inherited with the farm, but now under a grant, I am looking at designing, building, and trialing plastic-free aquaculture gear with the hope that we can reimagine what the future of aquaculture and oyster and shellfish cultivation could look like, so that we are using materials that aren't going to be causing issues for the waters that we rely on. So we know plastic is one of the larger contributors to greenhouse gases. And so as an oyster farmer or shellfish farmers, we all rely on clean waters and not rapidly warming waters. So I think that all of this is a really important piece to think about as a farmer. So this summer, I'll be doing those trials with the hope that we can find some gear that is viable and scalable and accessible to Maine farmers, and then why not go national and international in terms of what this gear could look like. So there's a lot to watch at the space, but I'm really excited about some of the potential for really delving into restorative, sustainable, and long-term positive farming techniques.
Thank you all so much. What a great start. So my next question has to do with shellfish and seaweed aquaculture have both been kind of on a remarkable growth curve in the last 5, 10, 15 years. And there's so much opportunity, as the stories we've just heard illustrate, for where to go with it, how to really launch businesses and steward them. How do you view aquaculture fitting into Maine's working waterfronts? How do we get it right? And how do we navigate the fact that there's controversy and challenge around aquaculture in some of our coves and communities?
Actually, I'll jump into that.
Great.
There's a lot of questions rolled into that, and so I'll at least
take one or two, whichever one feels good to you.
So, being born and raised in Stonington, the largest lobster landing port in the country, the working waterfront is something I think about all the time, whether I want to or not. It's right there. And so, for me, one of the reasons I got into oyster aquaculture is because I saw it as a potential. I wanted to model a business that lobstermen could potentially pivot to as things changed in the fisheries. And to me, part of that is because I don't want to see Stonington go away. Things are going to change, even though as a New Englander, that's a hard pill to swallow sometimes. But I really want to maintain our working waterfront. It's the heart and soul of our gritty little community down there. And for me, the working waterfront is going to change. It's always changed. We were just talking about cod fisheries, and as species change, the infrastructure and the needs of the working waterfront are going to shift. But my hope is that through initiatives like Breeze, working with lobstermen to diversify species, that we will see a little bit more diversity in our working waterfront, not just bait stations and lobster weighing stations and buyers and sellers, but that we'll see different infrastructure for oyster co-ops or processing seaweed or mussel farming and things like that. So I really have hope that aquaculture can help us maintain and keep the resilience of our working waterfront and our coastal Maine communities, because without a working waterfront, we're not going to have a Maine that we've known.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, I left the harder questions for some of you guys.
Yeah, is this one working?
Yeah.
Okay. To follow, that was a really good points made, Abby, actually. To fill in further onto the resiliency, we are working on a project to try and to grow deep sea scallops in deep water for the same sort of reasons that Abby was mentioning. This is a R&D project that we're doing within our company, because we see that also as an opportunity for a species that lobstermen can diversify to, that is a high value species. They're used to, earning more than mussels anyway. I keep harping back to that, but I really love mussels. So, but anyway, they can sell them by the piece. They're also used to working with gear in deep water. Sea scallops do very well in deep water. It's working really, really well. But what our part of, we're working with the DEI and Damien Brady and Dana Morse as well, and we're getting expertise from them on the science and the measuring, and Alex is doing a lot of the engineering, and we've got a cool piece of kit from Japan helping to ear hang them, so that's all technical stuff, but anyway, it's a really cool experiment, but we're getting some really good results. But our goal as a company is to work out what the economically viable, smallest size farm would be for a lobsterman to be able to have their own independent farm that would make them money that they could then do as well as lobstering, or as well as something else that they could then transition and again diversify their income, or perhaps as Abby was also referring to, that lobstermen need to diversify a bit, but there are also other younger people in these communities that may also want to stay on the coast, and I'm looking around, I don't want to offend anybody, but we are suffering, wrong word, tend to be a little older on the coast, and we are needing to keep our young people actively engaged in something that they love to do and that are going to earn them a living, that they're going to have a good life. And in coastal communities, we need to be able to have opportunities for those people to have a good living, that there's something, and aquaculture can do that. It's hard work, but it should be able to provide them with enough money to be able to send their children to college, and that sort of decent life that we would expect to be able to do by working hard. And that's what we see with these sorts of projects.
So we have more coastline than the state of California. Now, I want to see a raise of hand of anyone here who thinks the Portland Jetport is a huge airport. All aquaculture in Maine, including finfish, could fit in 1.5 Portland Jetports. So when people say, it's getting so industrial, I'd like to know as compared to what? And I think that's always my question. I'm not from Maine. I've lived here for about 8 years. I've lived all over the world. And the aquaculture community here is tiny, teeny, 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 teeny. And it continues to be teeny, 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 teeny. And when people want someone to make a living off a 4-acre farm, and as to Fiona's point, pay their people pay time off, health insurance, be able to support their family, as Joanna said, it's a hobby sometimes, right? Like, we need to talk about scaling. And we need to talk about scaling in a way that makes us who we have always been on the coast. Because to Abby's point, the coast is changing and it's going to continue to change. But you know what looks different now than it did 30 years ago? The fact that we're relying on a monoculture. This is the first time in Maine's history that we've not had landings all year round. Ever. That's the change. Aquaculture brings us back to who we've always been, which is mariners who rely on a diversified species. So I think that's kind of where my thinking around the controversy, certainly, like the leases have to be in a good place. The one here, yeah, it was awful, but it was never going to get through anyway. So I was like, why is everyone spending so much time on something that's not going to happen? Instead of putting their time into things that should happen. And I think that's what's so frustrating as aquaculturists. We often spend more of our time defending our reason to be alive with 8 acres than we do talking about how we could build this industry in a way that is restorative to Mainers who live here year-round, trying to make their life off the water. We have such a population drain to the south of the state. Not to the south of the state, out of the state. But the south of the state is the only place where we're not seeing a huge population drain. We're the oldest state in the country. And if you take out the southern part of Maine, we're the oldest state in the country by 6 years. That's terrifying. This then becomes a summer, the whole coast of Maine, once the lobster industry is done, is a summer community. That's terrifying. That's not who we are. We are Maine and a summer community. And that's who we've been since the train started coming up here from Philadelphia. And that's what I want to see Maine always be and always become. And if we continue to kind of look at our hands and say industrial, 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 and whatever that means when it's so far from the reality of what's happening, then we risk actually making ourselves saying industrial until the year-round communities are gone and can no longer survive. And the schools close. We've seen it. Cranberry Islands, perfect example. They were almost dead. They clawed themselves back. They have affordable housing. That community saved themselves. Go out to Frenchboro and you have a different story. Last time I checked, there was 2 kids out there. Go out to Monhegan. And right now, the lobster industry Stonington is thriving. The schools are bigger than they have been in a while. They're still not where they were 30 years ago, but they're bigger than a while. Vinyl Haven, one year they had 23 kids out there, one year born. 23 kids born. And that was like the first thing you heard when you walked off the island. Did you hear? Another baby was born. And this is really exciting. These year-round communities, they have a reason to stay because the lobster industry is thriving. Let's make sure we smooth that out so that we can absorb that shock when it happens year over year and still be who we've always been rather than who we are really fearful of becoming.
Just to piggyback on some of the things that have been said and some of the work that I was doing, I do think that there is a lot of potential in this sector as we grow to just be more innovative and to do things. And Mainers are resilient and handy and come up with solutions and gritty, and that is transferring over to aquaculture now, as well as some fresh air and some younger people doing it. And there are a lot of programs and things that we can do to innovate. I mean, there are things, I've got, chefs at restaurants who are like, oh, I've heard that, in New York, people, might take the shells back. Do you want the shells back? And I'm like, that would be awesome, but I don't have another truck to pick up all of these shells. I have a grater to tumble and sort our oysters, and would it be great if I could have a solar-powered generator out there to run that? Yes, that would be awesome. So when we can get to a certain size with our companies and with our ideas, we can make the moves to make this even more restorative, to find ways to innovate. We can mechanize things that are, hurting our bodies as we're flipping cages manually. There's a lot of manual work that goes into this. And there's so much room for more green technology to come into it, whether that's cages that aren't made out of plastic, or even having systems of repurposing them and mending them and having economies maybe away from the coast revitalized by building some of this equipment and gear that we could use that isn't so reliant on plastic, or is recycling them or repurposing them and giving some of the gear a new life. There's so many issues. As a sea farmer, I run into a million challenges a day, and it's overwhelming sometimes, and it's fun, and each one of those problems, if you take with it the idea of being restorative and collaborative, there's so much room for opportunity to make it green and sustainable and And those are the things we want to be working on. That's what we want to do, because we care about the species we're growing and the waters that we're in and the communities that we're feeding. There's just so much room to be improving, and that's where we want to spend our energy, all of us, I think.
Thank you all so much. Another question that we wanted to ask you is, we've heard all week about so many different ocean challenges around the globe, right? How do some of these other, sort of quotes, other ocean challenges affect your operation and inspire the innovation that Joanna was just talking about, whether it's plastics, like Abby has referred to, warming waters? How many times have we talked about warming waters this week? Increasingly crowded ocean spaces, loss of waterfront access, gentrification. There's a lot going on our waters. How do these challenges inspire you and your businesses to innovate and to find the hope that Bree was talking about in the beginning?
Well, challenges do force you to innovate. It's that or you don't survive. I mean, it's really, you just have to solve a problem. I think any type of farming is a constant process of solving problems. And whether they are social problems you have to deal with or technique problems, you're always doing it. But for our farm process, the warming waters have been probably the biggest challenge. It's not like you wake up one morning and say, goodness, the water's warmed. But it's been the last 10 years, we have started to notice that when spat settles, baby mussel seeds settles, it always was an episodic event. It has now become more unreliable. It's not easy to predict in the past. It's now almost impossible to predict. It used to happen at relatively in a certain time, and now it can happen at any time. And so we have had to start looking at ways to get access to mussel seed in a more reliable way, because without seed on any type of farming, you're done. And it has to be an annual thing or you're done. It's as simple as that. And so that for us has been the biggest challenge. But there are ways around it by understanding some of the biology and understanding a lot of engineering. There's a lot of engineering in aquaculture, isn't there, Abby?
The whole reason we started Atlantic Sea Farms is the warming water. So for us, it's the challenge we're trying to tackle with what we're doing. But I will also just kind of note on one of the topics you mentioned, Natalie, the gentrification of the coast. I think for fishermen, because our success is determined entirely by our fishing partners. And for them, they cannot find sternmen to work on their boats because there's no housing, because there's no affordable housing on the coast of Maine. Just to underline that over and over and over, there's none left. And people are like, can I build an in-law apartment on my back lawn? I mean, honestly, I think of the folks we work with, 6 of them have built garages, cush garages on the back to try to recruit people up from anywhere, anyone. They're like, will they show up to work? Don't even care if they've been on a boat. Like, can I get someone up here? There's no population, there are no people, there are no young people, and there's no housing for young people to move up to here even if they wanted to. So the gentrification of the coast makes aquaculture extremely hard, because even when people want to come, they can't afford it.
I don't even know where to start with that particular point.
No, I'll speak to that a little bit, because that also ties in with the shore access, which is only going to be, it's been an issue for some time, and it's only increasing, especially as more people get into aquaculture. So having access to the water, you wouldn't think in a state with this much shoreline that would be a problem. That's really real. And where I am, I'm very lucky. I have a public park that I can access my farm through. But if that park wasn't there, I mean, I'd have to, it's always good to be on good terms with your neighbors as an aquaculturist, but you'd have to get pretty friendly with someone to be able to access that water or commute a long way. And again, that goes into what resources are you using to cultivate these the species. So that's only going to become an increasing problem. But I think education and awareness around it is and flexibility is really the only way that we're going to be able to move forward and continue to have a thriving industry.
Yeah, definitely having housing for a crew has been one of the harder things, and having even space on boats. Like, so we're at a point where we have plenty of acreage to farm, but we don't have enough kind of people power, and I could maybe hire more people because they want to work for us if they could find a place to live, but then I would need another boat to put them on that boat. So we have this kind of bottleneck of production, even though there's tons of market demand, because we can't scale evenly in all of the right places in order to actually get willing workers to be on the farm and doing that. I'm hopeful that collaboration with enough people who are having this similar problem can change that. And then also by diversifying the species that we're harvesting, we can create more of a year-round product and job. So like if you can work year-round, if you don't have a seasonal job, then you are more likely to have be able to afford housing year-round. If your income is less, up and down, just harvesting, for one species, one season, if we can keep, growing different species, which provides resiliency, it also provides more year-round jobs, and ideally, we can find the housing and the employees to fill those jobs.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to nail something. We do actually farm year-round with the mussels, but I'm going to say something that's not politically correct. You're young enough to have more children. I'm not. I honestly thought I should have had more children. I'm way too late. I'm measuring my grandchildren. On a box, they can just about do it.
I think Joanna also just said that Fiona and Alex should farm kelp in the winter, is what I just...
She keeps doing that. We are not farming kelp. Not. We are shellfish farmers.
So actually, I've been thinking about farming kelp or dulse, or one and done. Although she already is trying to learn how to shuck oysters, which is great. 3 years old, doesn't seem too young to handle an oyster knife. She eats her weight in oysters at this point. But I'm very interested in diversifying the species that I'm cultivating on my lease. I have the licenses to grow seaweed, but the employee piece is a concern. There's no year-round housing on Deer Isle for rental. So I've joined the workforce housing board. We're trying to build workforce housing for year-round workers, but it's a slow process, especially in a pandemic and with shortage. So right now, my 2 employees are one's living in a camper with no running water. She's COA grad, so she can handle it. And the other is living in another cabin with also no running water. And obviously, that's not a year-round solution. So that's another really important piece when we think about having a workforce and having an industry that will function into the future. We need to sort of address some of these looming social issues that aren't just issues in the aquaculture sector, but across the board for keeping our communities vibrant.
And just another thing that we have been able to do, we have had the privilege of being able to have a small lease site in a lobster pound in Hancock that is no longer being used for lobster pounding. That's a verb, but that's sort of a thing of the past. So lobster pounds aren't really being used in Maine, but they are great areas for potentially growing shellfish or kelp, as well as our winter harvest. So they do freeze over, but we can literally cut through the ice and harvest oysters there through the winter. So some of this maritime infrastructure that exists along our coastline can be great. It's well poised for other new species to come in and for farms to be happening. So that allows us, again, to diversify the species and the months that we're actually working these waters and taking harvest out and feeding people. So there are a lot of opportunities, I think, along the coast, not just down south or in this area, but further east, where you could use some of these existing places and revitalize them in ways that are really restorative.
Just cast your mind over the fact that she breaks the ice to get the product to people to eat in the winter. It's a totally different game when we're out there in February and it's harvesting, and because we do this too. we have a boat to break it, she breaks it with her bare hands and dives in and gets them because she's Superwoman, and sometimes she drops her dog in it by mistake, but that's another story. But it's just I mean, we do love what we're doing. There are times in February when we love it a little bit less.
I like that too.
Thank you. There's a lot of challenges, right? There's a lot of challenges. Before we open it up to questions, I want to ask you one more question, which is, given all the challenges, what makes you most excited about your business? What drives you to hop out of bed in the morning and go for it one more day? What is the love of the work that drives you?
For me, it's being on the water. It's my happy place. Jumping in, growing food, handling these amazing animals, laughing with my coworkers, but being on the water is what feeds me. And I think growing up on Deer Isle, that's just in my blood. And I really hope that other people, that's one of the reasons why I want this industry to grow, because it makes me a happy person, and that has a ripple out effect.
Yes, definitely being on the water. I think as a human ecologist, I never knew that I was going to become a sea farmer, but I think that for me, sea farming and working on the ocean and producing food that I then sell directly, I know everyone I sell my seafood to, there's this level of connectivity that I get that it is just, for me, the quintessential experience of human ecology. It is so many facets, from the marine biology to, the ospreys we might be seeing overhead, to actually swimming in the water, to a food system, to community. It's every level of that, and I just feel so connected that it keeps me getting up every day, and I can't not do it.
I think for me it is I love bivalves. I just love the beauty of masses of beautiful black shiny shellfish, and the fact that they are so good for you, that they grow consistently, that they are so simple. It's sunlight, it's plankton, it's human healthy food, that we're able to provide this, and people can, because we control it really from, we control it. We make sure that we're in control of the product until it reaches the customer. We don't sell it through lots of people. And so that when they get it and they eat it, they can taste Maine. And we take great pride in that, and we do it properly, that it gives a huge satisfaction to know that we can answer any of their questions. We know that it's been cared for with love, mostly by my husband. He's passionate about making sure that every detail is done well, from the time that the seed is harvested and the husbandry is done properly, and every part of the processing takes the mussels' well-being into account at every single stage. And the fact that we can employ these people who also enjoy doing what they're doing, and that our boys are now able to take on that legacy and carry it on. All the people before us, it's just, I don't know, why do we like doing it? It's a huge sense of satisfaction and pride, and it doesn't ever get old. I mean, we get to live in the most beautiful place in the world, and I've traveled quite a lot, and I still think that. I really love it here, and we have that privilege of doing that, and we have a boat called Stewardship, and I think that just pretty much covers it, really.
It's all awful romantic about being on the water. The kelp season is November. Yeah. Is when it starts. Just to be clear. In February, I'm not on the water like, oh, I love this. In fact, all my oil gear has burn marks in it because I am so close to the heater that I burn holes in all my rubber oil gear. But it's no longer waterproof, which makes me colder. And then But for me, the romance is actually in the fact that this week there was a Washington Post story about us, and one of our fishermen that's been working with us now for 3 years said, And unfortunately, weren't able to capture his accent in writing because it would have been really dynamic if they were able. But he said, you know, the first year I grew 20,000 pounds. This year I grew 170,000. And boys, my ship's coming in. And the fact that we're proving out a concept that fishermen can be and should be the leaders in climate change, the most climate-friendly food on the planet, that they are the best possible stewards of their ocean, that the most climate-friendly food on the planet also tastes damn good, if I'm gonna say the products that we make with it taste great, and that it's making a meaningful difference in people's lives and starting an entirely new wave. And it's not happening in California, and it's not happening in Iceland, it's happening here, and it's happening quietly, and it's not happening slowly either. 2018, the entire seaweed industry in Maine harvested 30,000 pounds. This year we harvested just about 1 million pounds of line-grown kelp from less than 100 acres, all told. I think it's 82 altogether with all of our partner farmers in 3 different ports, from Portland to Eastport. And every single one of the people that we work with has a different fishing season this year because of it. Had one guy say last week, I'm only gonna fish 300 traps this season. I'm not gonna kill my back. I'm gonna spend some time with my family. I can't find crew. And I feel really good about some of this, the money I was able to bank this year, and don't need to be so dependent on just lobster because it's getting hard out there. And so that's what gets us up every day. We have 15 more in the queue. We'll have 10 more in the queue, all with 4-acre leases by October. And these are people who are taking hold of their future in a way that is really exciting. So can I just give a call to action too real quick? Is take all the energy that you have that you don't like about bad aquaculture leases, and take that energy and put it into supporting aquaculture leases that you'd want to see. Each and every one of us and each and every one of our partner farmers have to have hearings. And the only people who come to hearings are people who don't want to see the farm in front of their house. And all the people that love Bar Harbor oysters, all the people who love Hollander and De Konig mussels, all the people who love Atlantic Sea Farms kelp, they don't come. You know, they send us notes and say, good luck tonight. But we need you there. We need you at these hearings. We need you writing letters saying, we support what this family business is doing. We support a better future for Maine, a more resilient future. We support good aquaculture. We also oppose crap aquaculture. But we support good aquaculture. And I just ask, every one of you here has the power to help and to help build this exciting future. And I just ask that you give us the best you can and show up. If you buy our products, do that too, that helps. Tell all the restaurants in Philadelphia and New York and everywhere else to buy Atlantic Sea Farms kelp. But additionally, come to these hearings, it's really helpful.
Will you all join me in thanking our speakers? All right, we have some time for questions, and we're joined by a bird right on the edge there. That's lovely. Yeah, so we have some questions going, and do you need my mic?
Right up front. Great to see 4 entrepreneurs in front of us, in the flesh, that are really doing a great job in a tiny industry, as you described it. You spoke at the last minute about lobbying, and I was wondering about what kinds of lobbying you can do. The governor will be here this afternoon. I would think it would be a perfect opportunity to make your case for housing and access and other issues. So lobby away.
So we have this amazing organization, and I say that not impartially at all, because 3 of us are board members on the organization called Maine Aquaculture Association. It's pretty cool to be on an industry board that is more than half women. And it's representative of the aquaculture industry and our lobbying interests. The biggest piece, there's a lot of pieces that we lobby on that most people don't hear about. It's things like animal health, or making sure that there's, you know, protections around moving seed too far where we could be concerned about biohazards and, you know, those kind of things. So we're often, we are often lobbying for more regulation around certain things to protect our industry. But one of the big things has been trying to get more people at the Department of Marine Resources to go through the leases. And to me, this is the biggest issue that we face as an aquaculture industry, is that the regulations are excellent. They're rigorous, they're strong, they keep out bad actors. They're very good. We don't want to see them changed. We don't want to see them loosened. It keeps out the bad stuff that would also affect us who are in it. It just needs to be done in due process. And right now, I have 10 fishermen who have been waiting more than a year for leases that there's no opposition to. And it's simply because they don't have enough people at the DMR to go through leases. And it's not more complicated than that. And so we were just pleased to hear through our lobbying efforts that 2 new positions have been hired at the DMR. They had half of a hearing officer for 3 years to get through all applications. Now there are 2 new hearing officers, so we're optimistic. The staff there is excellent. We just need more of them.
Hello?
There you go.
Yeah, okay. It's lovely to see the sisterhood of aquaculture live. And most of us are exuberant about aquaculture and its possibilities. However, recent events on Frenchman's Bay have raised serious concerns, and I won't go into the American aquaculture issue because Darren and Natalie have discussed that, but it certainly would have been a disaster, and it's not over yet. A second concern, a large-scale industrial mussel farm, some 34 football fields in size, that's 45 acres, is being proposed in the narrow upper reaches of Frenchman's Bay. In March, over 80 people attended the Department of Marine Resources hearing for this mussel farm. There was scant support for the attendees for this ill-conceived project. Some 14 Lemoyne and Salisbury Cove lobstermen and women testified under oath that the size and the scale of the mussel farm would close much of Frenchman's Bay to lobstering. Rope entanglements, loss of equipment, and a narrow boating channel were some of the objections. Scientists at the Mount Desert Island Biological Laboratory testified that the noise and vibrations from industrial-scale harvesting equipment could jeopardize research studies using fragile microscopic specimens, and this site was right next to the laboratory. Dr. Haller noted, it is not possible to conduct a world-class, multi-million-dollar scientific research facility next to an industrial factory. Let's get this right. Let's be aware of the many unintended consequences of some proposals that are being made. If we just listen to the rationale of self-interested parties, we are not being intelligent
Could I ask you to get to your question? Thank you.
This is a statement, not a question, because you're all on one page, but I think some opposition and some concerns need to be raised.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's a little bit challenging to zero in on a specific proposal, but I do want to offer my panelists a chance to respond if they would like, any of them.
Well, there's a lot of detail in that statement that we could take apart and discuss in every point, but I'm not sure if that's particularly helpful. I would like to maybe address a couple of those, perhaps. If at that hearing, as the lady, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. Oh, Judith, you were at the hearing, so you did in fact hear the responses to those points, and they were in fact addressed in detail at the hearing, and were given pretty rigorous and scientific-based responses to all of those points. We addressed all of those. Oh, but I'm sorry, but the expert witnesses you brought on were people who were experts in other fields.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to jump in. I fully respect that there are a lot of concerns that are really deeply felt about all of these issues, and I appreciate you bringing it up. So I'm very reluctant to shut the conversation down, but this is a forum where we want to give an opportunity to think about a diversity of issues, and I would like to avoid us getting really zeroed in on one particular proposal, because that's not the intention of the COA Institute. So thank you so much for bringing up your concerns, and thank you to Fiona for hearing them. Okay. So I'm hopeful that folks are okay with that course of action. So.
Why don't we take one more here?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. My name is Beth, and I've been thinking about the Gulf of Maine, as I'm sure many of us have. And I wonder your perspective, since many marine protected areas allow fishing and aquaculture, do you think that would be a helpful move for the Gulf of Maine to get a marine protected area designation? I know it takes time. I'm just curious what your perspective would be.
Anyone have a thoughts?
I don't know that any of us are experts in the legalities around that. I mean, certainly Gulf of Maine is an incredible area, but I know myself that I don't know enough around the legalities around that to have an opinion, but it's a fascinating idea. I just don't know enough about it.
I can speak just a little bit about it. I have seen MPA's work really well in some areas of the world, and it is an amazing spot for species to sort of thrive, and for biodiversity to help seed other areas that may not be protected. So I think that the Gulf of Maine, maybe some areas like Cash's Ledge, would be worth looking into. And I know that Sylvia Earle was looking into making that into a hope spot. I'm not sure what happened there, but I think that pointed and well-researched areas, it can do a lot to help everyone, both on the ecosystem side and on the fisheries side. So I'm definitely open to thinking about that for the future of the Gulf of Maine, or areas in the Gulf of Maine.
Yeah, I think we can take one more.
Take another one or two?
Yeah, Fred, I'll tell you.
Thanks, Sean.
To lighten things up a bit. 2 weeks ago, I bought 5 lobster rolls, for which I paid $9 less than what I paid for my first car. I told that story to a previous speaker at the Institute this week, and he nodded and said, yeah, that's about right. And I said, what's a good year for you at the dock per pound? $6.70 was his answer, and he was getting that last year. I said, what is it this year? $3.25. I said, where is the money in lobstering? And not with you. It's in distribution. You folks avoid distribution. How did you do that?
I wish I did. So we can sell out here, we'll sell a jar of fermented seaweed salad at $4.99. And the other day I got a picture from someone, look, I found your product. And it was out at an independent store in California for $14.99. It's just, I think there's also, we in aquaculture and seafood in general are, we're all in the cold chain. It's extremely expensive. And with fuel prices and transportation shortages and packing and additionally, there are no truckers out there. So suddenly all the trucking wages have gone up double just to try to keep people in that world. We had someone try to back in for an hour and a half the other day to a huge loading dock because they're like just finding anybody to get behind these wheels. And so these distribution costs have gone up for everyone, and it's certainly a problem we're all seeing. I think one thing that has been really nice for us at ASF, and I'm not sure, I can't speak for other folks here because I know there are different issues, is it's been when the shelves were bare because of supply chain issues, the fact that we are vertically integrated, we create the seeds for our farmers. We distribute those seeds for free to our farmers. We guarantee purchase of everything they grow. We run the transportation, we run the harvest, we run the bags, and we run the processing facility. Our product was always on the shelf because we own our destination. We own our food. And that's something that we've gotten really far away from in the food system. There's 7 people touching any one thing, and it's one of the reasons that we've seen food prices go up so high. These supply chain shortages caused by the pandemic, and then worker shortages and things like that have just created a really hard system. It is affecting us, but because we all touch our food at every point of it before it goes out to the customer, has allowed us to actually meet demand in a way that is different. Now, Joanna, for example, can't meet demand because her farm's not big enough, but for the demand she has, she's the one touching it and it's going out. And that's something that's really different about what we do.
Yes, and for us, we're a little bit in between. We also ship out, most of our product goes down through the cold chain distribution, and we were getting price increases from the truckers with fuel surcharges, and every 2 weeks they were increasing the prices for the similar reasons. Packaging was going up every 2 weeks, so the prices to the consumer were going up at the other end a lot. Not our prices weren't going up, but theirs were at that end. But also to the fact that during the pandemic we were able to supply our local food banks, for example, and we were having people coming in collecting when there weren't any proteins on the supermarket shelves. People were coming to the packing facility because we had it there. And honestly, in those first 2 weeks, anyone actually remember all the way back when it all crashed and we thought, what is happening to the world? And we weren't sure what was going to happen at all. It just felt good to do something, to be able to say, okay, we have mussels and we have oysters, come and get them. Just come and get them, locals. And they did. And it felt nice for us to be working and doing something meaningful and productive at the time. We also can't really fill our market, but ours is in a distribution of it. But people want... It's still considered local if you sell down the eastern seaboard. We don't do air freight because we don't want the carbon footprint of that. So we're selling down everything that can go by within 2 days trucking. That's where we've set our own customer base for that. And it's just a very difficult... It's employees. It's people are having trouble getting people all the way around.
We're able to capitalize on the fact that we're a Bar Harbor Oyster Company in Bar Harbor, and there are millions of people who come here. So I harvest and deliver twice a week, same day. So things come out of the water, and they are at all of our restaurants within a matter of hours, which does allow me to kind of capitalize and have, there's no middleman, but there's a fair amount of paperwork and headache that also goes with that. So all of our clients are, chefs and restaurant owners, and I deal with all of them directly, and we drive and deliver to downtown Bar Harbor, but there's just enough demand for it here that we can, until we hit market saturation, which I expect will be years, we can just keep everything right here. So there's a lot of work that goes into being your own dealer and shell stock shipper, and you need a facility and a lot of inspections and a lot of paperwork and a lot of tags, and it's expensive, but I love knowing where every single one of my oysters goes, and I do make a higher profit margin because I do all of that myself.
Just briefly, I have the same business model as Joanna in terms of those licenses, and basically I move every single oyster on Deer Isle. And part of that is because I'm small peanuts, and don't have the capacity for more, and I'd love to have more product, but also because the demand is high. And we're definitely not Bar Harbor, but there's a lot of people on Deer Isle that love oysters. So.
Well, thank you all. I think that we are out of time for questions. I know that there were many, many more, but everyone will be around for a little bit, so feel free to ask your questions directly. Thank you so much for your interest in this topic and for joining us this morning, and thank you especially to our 4 panelists.
Thank you all. I took my jacket off because I was sweating after being like botching the American aquaculture thing. So thank you for the added clarity there, and this was really, really wonderful. And we could spend hours, obviously, on this topic. When we were putting the whole week together, we were like, we need it to be a month-long institute. We can't get there, but this is like the North Atlantic right whale skimming the surface, which is really nice. Thank you all for coming, and everyone has been, I think, watching the mural unfold outside, and Sophie Tuttle, who's the artist, and some of our staff from Allied Whale are going to be out there if you want to ping some questions and hear about how it was designed, what the idea was all about. So, and that's going to happen right out at the mural. And for sure, come back tonight for the last session of the week at 5 p.m. with Sam Waterston, David Rockefeller, and Susan Rockefeller. So thanks, everyone, once more.